So the deck has finally been shuffled and the dust has settled around UFC 303 and UFC Fight Night Saudi Arabia. Ladies and gentlemen, we got a lot to discuss in this video right here. I'll put the time codes down below, but really the news thus far is we kind of knew. I made several videos on my channel kind of covering UFC 303 and what's going on with Conor McGregor, Michael Chandler. Is the fight on? Is it off? And the UFC really just kept us in a lot of darkness. And the only real answers that we were getting was very cryptic and things that really didn't make a whole lot of sense from Ariel Helwani. But a lot of that was kind of read between the lines and try to figure out what's going on. And a lot of that kind of just made it sound like there was an injury. And at the end of the day, Conor McGregor is injured, and the UFC, it sounds like they're going to look to try to get him versus Chandler back on the books in August or early September seems to be what they are targeting at this point. And then to make things even worse, Jamahal Hill heard Alex Pereira was going to have to step in, so the man got hurt apparently, and he's out of his fight with Carlos Ulberg. And then Khamzat Chimaev is violently ill, as Dana White. Those are the words from Dana White, and it's just really unfortunate. But we got a lot to unpack in this video, man. And the fights that are going to be taking place at UFC 303 are Alex Pereira stepping in against Jiri Prochazka for the rematch. Brian Ortega versus Diego Lopes will be the co-main event. And Carlos Ulberg remains on the card, and he will be taking on Anthony Smith. Now, as far as UFC Fight Night Saudi Arabia, which I guess that's what I'll start with first, Ikram Aliskerov is going to be stepping in against Robert Whittaker. And my initial reaction to this was a lot different than what a lot of other people had, right? I love this matchup, for the UFC to put this together. And I know a lot of people initially are going to go, well, he doesn't deserve the fight. How does he go from being an unranked guy fighting a bunch of cans and all of this bull crap? And he's going to get to go in there against Robert Whittaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I am of the mindset of these guys that the UFC wants to push. They want to give them these opportunities. They either are who we think they are and who they say they are, or they're not. And I love this opportunity because it's going to be sink or swim for Ikram Aliskerov. Is he as good as people want to say that he is? Now, I am going to tell you, early prediction, I think Robert Whittaker absolutely destroys Ikram Aliskerov. And I know a lot of people want to point out, well, when's the last time Robert Whittaker's finished somebody? He's been in the decision machine. He's older. He's declining, blah, blah, blah. Guys, Robert Whittaker was preparing for Khamzat Chimaev, right? So what that means is Robert Whittaker probably had a full-blown wrestling camp. I think that he is going to be more than prepared for any of the grappling that Ikram is going to bring to the table. And in terms of the striking, Ikram does do a good job against the low kicks. He has a very good answer for low kicks. He gets his leg out of the way. He checks kicks really well. But in terms of the striking, he does have good power. He does have some thud in his hands. But outside of that, he is incredibly basic on the feet. And I don't think he possesses the skills to take out a guy like Robert Whittaker. I think outside of, Ikram going in there, bull rushing Robert Whittaker, closing him down and landing a good shot inside the first round, I think Robert Whittaker puts on a masterclass and absolutely picks Ikram Aliskerov apart. So with all that being said, I think this is a great matchup. And what I like about this is a lot of people, we were talking about this on my live stream. Oh, go out and ask Kamaru Usman to come off the couch. Go ask this person. They even, when this first was reported, there were talks of it being Nasruddin Imavov. Why is it going to be Imavov? He just was in there with Jared Cannonier for 4 rounds. Like, that didn't make a lot of sense to me. Ikram was already preparing for essentially somebody we don't even know. So he was basically being kind of, getting handed a win, pretty much, a free guy to knock out. And now he has to wait a week, and everyone's like, oh, but he was cutting weight and this and that. Guys, Ikram Aliskerov is not that big of a dude, right? I mean, he is a big guy, but he's not enormous for middleweight. I doubt he's cutting a tremendous amount of weight to make 185, and he was already preparing for a fight that was supposed to take place this weekend on the Taira card. And now we're in a position where instead of Thursday night is usually the night where the guys get into the depth of their cut, right? That's usually where a bulk of the cut happens. This was at media day during the day. This was all resolved before he had to start getting into the nitty gritty of the weight cut. So it's not like he was in the middle of a harsh weight cut and they're like, hey man, stop what you're doing, pack your bags, go head to Saudi Arabia. That's not what happened here. And I like the opportunity because it was a guy that was preparing for a fight. So there's no asterisks on this event. Because if they would have brought in Usman off the couch or somebody else, it would have been like, oh, I flew across the world, on short notice. He wasn't preparing. He wasn't training. Ikram Aliskerov was preparing for a fight. I like the matchup. I think Ikram Aliskerov is a talented fighter. I think he has good grappling. There is some danger with him, especially in the first round. He hasn't been in a 5-round main event inside the UFC. It's a different ball game. There's going to be a crowd involved. You know, obviously, you'd like to think that the crowd is probably going to be rooting for Ikram Aliskerov, but at the end of the day, I don't know how you can't like Bobby Knuckles, man. For him to take this fight and be willing to step in, as well as Ikram Aliskerov, glad the UFC was able to scramble and put this together, because, not glad that they scrambled, but this is a good fight. You know, I think that we should be excited for this matchup. Stylistically, it's an interesting clash, and we're going to find out if Ikram Aliskerov is who people want to say that he is. So, well done by the UFC to put that together. They were doing, the best that they could. Dana said, look, nobody wanted this fight. Robert Whittaker said, absolutely. Gotta love Robert Whittaker. Shout out to both guys for for making this happen, because it is a great style clash. Moving on. Diego Lopes, Brian Ortega getting added as the co-main event, for 303. I mean, this is a sensational fight. This is an incredible fight. And I know people are going to say, look, I didn't ask for this. We didn't want this. And this kind of just came out of nowhere, right? This wasn't supposed to be on 303. And whenever you get Conor McGregor on a card, right, they're going to build out a pretty below average card, right? I mean, I feel like that's pretty fair to say. And it's not going to be filled with a bunch of stars, because everyone's there for Conor McGregor at the end of the day. So why are you going to waste your star power on a card that's going to revolve around Conor? Like, I get it. But to add Brian Ortega, who is an absolute warrior, has some of the best jiu-jitsu in the game, has some pretty good boxing, is as durable as they come, as tough as they come, has great cardio. We saw him come off an incredible performance against Yair Rodriguez. He steps in here on a rather short notice against one of the most dangerous up-and-coming fighters in the UFC, period, up-and-coming stars in Diego Lopes. I got to be honest, I'm worried for Brian Ortega in this fight. And the reason I'm worried is we've never seen Brian finished. We've seen him take a beating from Max Holloway. We've seen him, get hurt badly against, Yair Rodriguez. We've seen him get his head spun around. We've seen him get dropped. We've seen it all from Brian Ortega. He's a grizzled vet who's just, the injuries have kind of plagued this guy, and it's kept him away from the octagon and kept him from being active. And we're finally getting a rather quick turnaround, right? I believe it was February where he fought Yair, on that UFC Mexico Fight Night card. Now here he is for International Fight Week. Big moment for Brian Ortega against an absolutely, maybe the most dangerous up-and-coming guy in the division, and one of the most dangerous guys in the UFC, period, on the rise, and Diego Lopes, who... Not only does Diego Lopes have really good jiu-jitsu and really good grappling, his striking is really dangerous. He's ferocious. His boxing is really good. He loves to push the pace early on, get right in your face, and put you in immense danger, very early on in the fight. And that's kind of what scares me, is Brian Ortega is a guy that doesn't mind getting after it, but he kind of likes to get a feel for the fight. He kind of likes to move around, get his feet under him before he really likes to try to explode and make anything happen. And against a guy like Diego Lopes, who has looked invincible, goes out there in the biggest test he's had this far. You could say his biggest test was that short notice stint against Movsar Evloev, and we saw what he was about. And then he goes out there and melts Sadiq Youssef. Destroyed Sadiq Youssef. You would have never have known that Sadiq Youssef was a highly touted guy in the division at any point, because Diego just ran right through him. And he's going in there against a guy in Brian Ortega who has it all. He's a veteran. The jiu-jitsu, the striking is improved. Like, Brian has it all. But what I like about this matchup that's so intriguing is not only is it International Fight Week and it's a big spotlight, but whenever we see a guy who, this almost reminds me of kind of like the Khamzat situation, where he's going out, he's running through people, you give him a little bit of a test, like Khamzat was tested with Li Jing Liang, then you throw him into the Shark Tank and you give him a top 5 guy where it's like, okay, here you go, man, sink or swim. And that is what is going on with Diego Lopes right now. And I got to be honest, guys, I really think Diego can get this done. I think he can get this done because he's a big dude. He's physical, he's strong, he's explosive, and he is a better striker than Brian Ortega. What gives me some concern is considering, Ortega has been around. He's been around the block. He does have really good jiu-jitsu. I don't think that Diego Lopes is a better grappler. He may have a little bit better wrestling, but in terms of the jiu-jitsu, I think that we got to go with Brian Ortega on that. He has some of the best submissions in the game, so even if Lopes is able to hurt him and Ortega pulls guard, he's incredibly dangerous. So I think that this fight plays out on the feet. I don't know if we're going to see a ton of grappling, but Diego loves to start fast. He loves to start violent. And if he's not able to get Brian Ortega out of there and he expends a lot of energy, What happens? Do we see the veteran presence of Brian Ortega take over? I got to be honest, guys. I think Diego Lopes is that good. I do think he's that good. I don't know if he's able to finish Brian Ortega, but it's kind of hard for me to see Diego Lopes winning a decision, given what we've seen from both guys thus far. But early prediction, I think I'm leaning towards Diego Lopes, to be honest with you. I know that might surprise some people, but I think it's a great matchup. But I think Diego Lopes is just that good, and I think that he's a star on the rise, man. Moving on, Anthony Smith, Carlos Ulberg. So apparently, like I said, Jamahal Hill here is Alex Pereira is going to be headlining the card. He's got an injury and he pulls out. Now, I mean, I don't know what's going on with Jamahal Hill, but this is an interesting fight because Carlos Ulberg, he should dominate. Carlos Ulberg, in my opinion, I've been on the record saying on my channel here for a long time, guys, that I think Carlos Ulberg is just that good. I think that you have to pick your poison with him. He's a big, strong guy. He has good takedown defense. He has good grappling of his own that has came a long way. He's improving every time we see him. And he has the ability to sit on the outside, pick and poke at you, play that point style, type of striking game where it's very clean, the feints, the footwork. He can play that game. But if you decide to bum rush him, you get put out like what we saw happen to Alonzo Menafield. So it's like, how do you want it with Carlos Ulberg? Which way do you want to go? Do you want to play the tick for tack type of game, or you want to get in his face and take the risk of getting starched? And if Anthony Smith is going to if he's going to win this fight, it's going to come to the grappling. I mean, Anthony Smith has not dealt well with high-level strikers. He has not dealt well with guys that have really good low kicks. And Carlos Ulberg has some of the best kicks in the division. I know we have Alex Pereira, who's definitely the best. We have Alexander Rakic, who has some really good kicks of his own. We have Jan Blachowicz. We got some guys. Carlos Ulberg has some devastating leg kicks, man. He's got a lot of power. They're fast. He's way faster than Anthony Smith. He is way better striking than Anthony Smith. But we saw Anthony Smith's last time out against Petrino, we saw him halt the hype of a young up-and-coming prospect. But I believe Carlos Ulberg is way better than Petrino. I think Carlos Ulberg is actually legit, and he is not afraid to open up. We've seen with Petrino, one of my concerns with him heading into that matchup with Anthony was he does not like to open up. He was in there against Tyson Pedro, just couldn't seem to pull the trigger. Carlos Ulberg knows how to pull the trigger. He'll let his hands go. He'll let the kicks go. He'll set you up. I think he finishes Anthony Smith within 2 rounds. And, outside of Anthony Smith utilizing his veteran presence to take Ulberg down and get some sort of submission, I just think that he gets absolutely battered and picked apart by Carlos Ulberg. But shout out to Anthony Smith for stepping in, man, because Hill pulling out. I mean, this has just been absolute mayhem altogether. But I'm glad that Carlos Ulberg could stay on the card. I think he puts on a masterclass against Anthony Smith and gets the job done. Last but not least, Alex Pereira, Jiri Prochazka 2. What a job by the UFC to get this thing together. And I felt that this could have been a fight that was waiting in the wings for the UFC because Jiri Prochazka recently had said, listen, I signed a contract, but nothing has been official. Nothing's been announced at this moment, but I have signed something. That must have been this fight. The minute the UFC canceled that press conference, I felt like they kind of had a vibe like maybe this doesn't happen with Conor McGregor. This was the backup plan to have Pereira and Prochazka ready as a backup because they were going to need some sort of title fight if Conor McGregor was not going to be on the card. I mean, outside of John Jones, John is a champion, actually. So at that point, it doesn't really matter. But you would need a huge name, to try to headline the card without a title being on the line. And I don't think anybody can do that at this point other than Conor McGregor. This is a great fight, right? We know what we're getting in this matchup. We've already seen a glimpse of it already. Alex Pereira was able to finish Jiri Prochazka. People had said it was a little bit of an early stoppage, which I could see where you're coming from. But at the end of the day, this is going to be a kickboxing fight. This is probably going to be a kickboxing fight. And the Alex Pereira that showed up against Jamahal Hill, physically, timing-wise, speed-wise, technical-wise, I think he beats Jiri Prochazka even easier than he did the first time around. But what does concern me, Alex Pereira has been dealing with some broken toes. He's been dealing with some broken toes, and I know that doesn't sound like something that's that important, but in terms of planting, pivoting, moving around, that's going to affect your movement a little bit. Maybe when the adrenaline's pumping, it doesn't have that much of an impact, but this is a great matchup. This is a great fight. These are two of the biggest names in the light heavyweight division, probably the two most well-liked guys in the division, in terms of the fan bases. Great fight. I think we see somebody get finished here. I'm going to go Alex Pereira. I haven't picked against him since he's been in the UFC, and I've been right every time except for the one when he lost to Izzy in the rematch. So I'm always riding with Alex, man. I'm a huge fan of his. I love watching him fight. I think he's able to get this done, and shout out to both of these warriors, man, for stepping up, being willing to save a card. Once again, Alex Pereira stepping in, saving a huge event, just like he did for UFC 300, and just like he did again for this one. And even UFC 295, when John Jones and Stipe Miocic fell apart, they elevated him to the main event, and he's became one of the biggest stars inside the UFC. I've been saying he's a bigger star than Israel Adesanya. I even made a whole video on that, talking about how he is a bigger star at this point. Nonetheless, great job by the UFC dealing with all of this craziness that's been going on. Shout out to them for doing the best that they can to get these fights, back on the books. And I just want to finish with this with Khamzat Chimaev. I am devastated that fight did not happen, right? I mean, I figured that something was going on with Conor McGregor and that fight wasn't going to happen. I'm sure they'll get that rebooked. This is devastating for Khamzat, man. It seems like there's something every time with this guy in terms of his health. It's very, very concerning. And every time he has a huge opportunity, it seems like it falls by the wayside. Whether he's missing weight, whether he's injured, whether he's having to pull out of a Leon Edwards fight, Paulo Costa's hurt and pulls out of a fight. And it's been one thing after another. And he finally gets arguably the biggest test of his career against Robert Whittaker, a real middleweight, where if Khamzat wins that fight, we know that he's getting a title shot next. And for him to have something happen so close to the fight, for Dana White to say he's violently ill, it's got to be something serious. And it just always has been something with this guy's health. Hopefully, they can get this figured out with Khamzat, because, man, you talk about a guy that used to be so active to now being incredibly inactive. He's one of the biggest stars in the UFC that hasn't been active. It's been health. It's been whatever reasons that, he hasn't been active. It's just been really sad to see. It's been devastating, but hopefully he can get well soon and we can see him back in there and get another opportunity. But at some point, I'm just worried about the UFC continuing to give him big headlining opportunities, because they just keep getting botched on the side of Khamzat Chimaev. But hopefully Khamzat is okay. But nonetheless, well done by the UFC. Got to give him a round of applause, because it's very easy to come on here and be negative and hate on everything, and I don't like to do that on my channel. I'm of that fighter's mindset, of that football mindset. Look, this is what we're dealt. This is what we have. Let's move ahead. Let's look at what we have and be happy with what we have, and find peace in knowing the UFC was able to piece some things together, give us some solid cards for the hands that were dealt. It's not easy, to build a card when Conor McGregor falls off of it. I don't think that we've seen that inside the UFC since he's been a part of it. Well done by the UFC. Shout out to them. Like this video. Comment your thoughts down below on the deck being shuffled, because it has been absolute mayhem. Subscribe to the channel. Help your boy out. I would appreciate it. See you next time.